Faith is like a muscle. It grows with use and it atrophies if it isn't used. The diagram here illustrates how faith grows. The solid circle represents my present faith. Anything that falls outside of the circle is something that I'm able to trust God to do and have actually seen him do. Those things outside of the circle are what God can do, but I never trusted him to do. If I don't exercise my present faith, my circle of confidence, what I trust God with, shrinks, and I find it harder and harder to trust him. As long as I exercise my present faith, it remains the same. It doesn't grow, but it doesn't diminish either. In order for my faith to grow, I must step outside of the circle of present confidence and trust God to do things the Word says he can, but for which I have never trusted. As I do this, the circle of my faith, confidence in God, grows, and it's easier to trust him to do much next time. So now we're going to look at 3 different Bible verses to see if we can understand the 3 different kinds of faith. Our first verse is Ephesians chapter 2, verses 8 and 9. And God saved you by his grace when you believed, and you can't take credit for this. It is a gift from God. Salvation is not a reward for the good things we have done, so none of us can boast about it. Then we're going to go to Jude chapter 1, verse 3. Dear friends, I have been eagerly planning to write you about the salvation we all share. But now I find that I must write about something else, urging you to defend the faith that God has entrusted once for all time to his holy people. And 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 7. For we live by believing and not by seeing. When the Bible speaks of faith, it refers to it in 3 different but related ways. In Ephesians chapter 2, verses 8 and 9, we are told that we're saved by grace through faith. Saving faith is the initial choice to trust the gospel message and receive God's gift of salvation through Christ. And Jude chapter 1, verse 3 speaks of contending for the faith. Here, faith has an idea of the whole of the Christian doctrine, what we believe as Christians. We must make a choice to believe what God says is truth. This is doctrinal faith. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 7 says that we live by faith. This speaks of the choices we make to trust God situation by situation as we walk through life. This living faith always stands on the foundation of saving and walking faith. We cannot trust God day by day with the circumstances of life if we never trusted him for salvation, or if we do not believe what he says is truth, the doctrines of the Bible. This is why living faith is a growing thing. We trust God more as we learn more about him. Now we're going to read Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1. Faith is the confidence that we hope for all will actually happen. It gives us assurance about things we cannot see. The Bible defines faith as confidence in what we hope for and assurance of what we do not see. What this means for Christians is that even though we may not fully understand what is going on around us, we can have confidence that God is completely trustworthy and always has our best interest in mind. For example, an airline pilot may have his view obscured by clouds, but he has been trained to rely on his instrument panel to give him the accurate information and direction he needs to safely navigate his course. In a similar way, the follower of Christ is to live by faith in God and his word on a daily basis. I often heard the late revival preacher Manly Beasley define faith this way. Faith is living as though the Bible is true, even when I do not feel like it is true. The reason I can live as it is true is because it is true. The reason it is true is because God says it is true. Faith is depending on God, and this begins only where depending on self ends. Sadly, for many of us, depending on ourselves is such an ingrained habit that is only put aside when we come to the end of ourselves. Therefore, God must break us before we will trust him. We must engineer our circumstances to bring us to the end of ourselves, or else we will never experience the blessings of faith. What he desires, though, is that we mature to the point trusting him by choice and not merely by necessity. Most likely today and every day you encounter situations where you could and should trust God. It may be in relationships, business, finance, or some other facet of life. Trusting God is always a choice. It is finding what God says about your situation in the scriptures and then choosing to act on that faith. Proverbs chapter 30 verse 5 says, "Every word of God is flawless, and he is a shield to those who take refuge in him." So let's reflect on that for a minute and see exactly what that might mean. Any law of science is not relied on until it has been thoroughly tested and shown to be consistent and true. The Hebrew word for flawless could also be translated tested. It is the idea of a refined precious metal without any impurities. Hence the King James Version translates to pure. What a comfort it is to know that literally every word of God has been tested in the crucible of human experience and proven to be true. The result to us is significant, because every word of God is proven true. His promises provide a shield of protection and a place of refuge for us. Oh, the promises themselves aren't mystical, but they are shown to be the truth about God, and they show us how and when to take refuge in Him. Peter tells us He has given us a very great and precious promises, so that through them you may participate in the divine nature. 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 4. The only problem with the shield of God's truth arises is when we don't hide behind it. Our verse tells us He is a shield to those who take refuge in Him. A shield is useless until you hide behind it. During the Vietnam War, helmets were standard issue in most infantry soldiers. Because of the hot, humid jungle conditions, these helmets were often unworn. And tragically, many soldiers lost their lives because they weren't making use of the protection available to them. In the same way, the provision and protection of God's promises are of no benefit to us unless we take refuge in them. And we can't take refuge in them until we learn them and begin applying them. He is a shield to those who take refuge in Him. That is all we have for day 4, ladies and gentlemen. Catch us in the next one for day 5. And as always, God bless and have a great day.